So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's celebration of the Liturgy of the Day. My name is Osho Brad, one of the priests with the Dragonfly Sangha, and I'm happy as always to be with you all this evening. Let us share the peace. May all beings awaken to that peace which is our true home. Let us take refuge. I take refuge in the ground of being within which I live and move and breathe. Let us make the accord. I take sanctuary in the heart of being, accepting all of my delusions in thought, word, or deed, born of ignorance, hatred, and greed. Let us give thanks. I give thanks for all beings, awakening to the interbeing of all nature. May my heart be open and my mind clear. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may all come to know that peace which is beyond all understanding. Since it is the practice of enlightenment, that practice has no beginning. And since it is enlightenment within the practice, that realization has no end. So I wanted to continue my talk from last week. Last week I wanted to spend some time talking about some common misconceptions about Buddhism. And I spoke about, there's only one kind of Buddhism, or is the Dalai Lama like the Pope for Buddhism, and things like that. And this evening I wanted to talk about 5 more misconceptions that have to do with sort of Buddhist beliefs and practices. Specifically, monasticism, so are all Buddhists monks, diet or vegetarianism, meditation, karma, reincarnation. So I'm going to chat about those a bit. And I'll try to touch on these fairly quickly. I do have a tendency to ramble, so I'll do my best. But each of these could easily be their own Dharma talk. And maybe we'll dive more deeply into some of these, especially if you'd want to hear about these. Just, let us know. Reach out to us, comment. We'd love to hear from you. So, the first one that I want to discuss tonight is that you need to be a monk to really practice Buddhism. And this is a popular image, right, of the Buddhist monk. And there are lots of images out there where you have Buddhists in robes. I mean, I'm wearing a robe. I'm not a monk. But, Buddhists in robes are a very common thing. Robed figures, shaved heads, sitting on meditation cushions. But you don't need to be cloistered in a monastery to practice Buddhism. But some do, right? There is a very strong and long-standing history of monasticism in Buddhism. So some monks do decide or some Buddhists do decide to live in monasteries, or convents, because there are Buddhist monks and nuns. But you also don't have to be a monk forever if you choose that path, if only for a time. So in some countries, some Buddhists enter a monastery for a period of time, maybe even just a year, and then they leave. So it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. But, sometimes people think like, boy, but isn't it easier or kind of better to practice when we can step away? And sometimes it can be nice to, get out of the normal habit and routine of life. And that's why a lot of Buddhist communities, including ours, have retreats. It could be day-long retreat, weekend-long, could be week-long. But it's an opportunity to focus, more sharply and for a longer time than maybe you normally can on some of the practices or some of the elements of your practice. But then we come back, right? Because the goal for a lot of us, priests and lay people included, is to apply our practices to daily life, to apply the teachings to our daily life. And speaking, of lay people, we talk about lay people, we talk about priests, we talk about monks. Not all Buddhists are monks or priests. Not all priests are monks, right? We have priests in our order, the Order of the Dragonfly, but we don't currently have any monks who live that sort of monastic lifestyle. And a Sangha, a Buddhist community, normally consists of both lay and ordained members, right? And in many schools, to kind of talk about the priesthood, in many schools, priests can get married, have families. They can be male or female. And it's funny because this point was actually really important to my parents when I told them that I was entering seminary, 4 years ago. Is that like, hey, like, does that mean you can't get married? In case I would ever want to get remarried. And I told them, no, that's not what this means. I could get married if I want to. So while a lot of great teachers over the years and over the centuries were monks, and a lot of sutras and a lot of great teachings and philosophical thinking have come from those monks who dedicated their lives to teaching and reflection. You don't need to be a monk to practice Buddhism. You also don't have to shave your head, though a lot of us do that as well. That's just because we like it. It's simpler. So the next misconception: Buddhists don't eat meat. Right? There's a common view that a Buddhist needs to be a vegetarian. They don't eat meat. And I've even noticed over the years, there are menu items called Buddha bowls, right, that are invariably vegetarian in their makeup. And certainly, Buddhists can be vegetarian, right? Buddhism is very inclusive in that regard. And honestly, I've probably encountered more vegetarians in our community than in any other group that I belong to. I remember the first time I came to a liturgy, Oban, many years ago, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of vegetarian food that people had brought, kind of for a potluck we were having following, and so I think it makes sense that a lot of people think of Buddhists being vegetarian because Buddhism has a strong link with nonviolence and avoiding killing, right? So obviously they extend that to animals. And some schools do require a vegetarian diet, and a lot of other schools encourage it, for those very reasons. But it's not a requirement, it's not a commandment, in the way that you see certain rules in other traditions. And there's actually an interesting bit of two interesting bits of history related to Buddhism and meat. The early Buddhist communities were the monks were beggars, right? So they would take their bowls and they would go into the lay community. They would go into town and they would beg silently for food, and the lay practitioners would come out and they would give food. They put food in the bowl, and the monks had to eat what they were given. And the rule was that, look, if you get meat in that bowl as an offering to you, and this is, what you received, then you need to eat it. The only exception being, unless that animal was slaughtered just, for the specific purpose of feeding the monks. And the other bit of history, in some stories, it's sort of related to the same thing, that if you were offered this, you need to eat it. The Buddha's last meal, the one that in the story of the Buddha made him sick, and ultimately led to his death, is often thought to have been a meal of wild boar or pork. Some stories say it's mushrooms, but others say that it was meat. So, can Buddhists eat meat? Yes, Buddhists can eat meat, but you can also make the choice to not eat meat as a part of your practice. The next misconception that I wanted to talk about is related to meditation, and that all Buddhists meditate. And this is a very popular image of the Buddhist. I mean, if you Google Buddhist, you're going to see pictures of people meditating in robes, most likely, right? Most statues of the Buddha are of the Buddha seated in meditation, right? So this is a very common understanding of Buddhists. Like, oh, like you're a Buddhist, you meditate a lot, right? And some schools do obviously emphasize meditation. You know, the Zen school comes to mind with the practice of Zazen, which means, you know, simply sitting or just sitting, right? And so that's a big part of how they practice and how they reflect. You know, and meditation is mentioned in the sutras being Buddhist scriptures, but it's often directed at monks, not necessarily lay people or lay practitioners. And we certainly incorporate meditation into our practice, right? We'll spend some time in quiet reflection and meditation following this talk this evening. But meditation is just one of the things that we do. Obviously, our practice involves, you know, reflecting or delivering Dharma talks, as you know, we do in these weekly sessions. We offer incense, we chant, we celebrate liturgies, whether it's the liturgy of the day or a weekly, you know, liturgy like this, or the annual liturgies that we celebrate to mark different moments in the Buddha's life. We read and we study, we serve the community. So there's a lot of different ways that Buddhists practice, and meditation is just one of those. And I call that out because I think a lot of people are drawn to Buddhism and they explore Buddhism because of its links to mindfulness. And you know, I've been very grateful of the fact that Buddhism has kind of come into the forefront for that. You know, and some of the studies that have been done on mindfulness and neuroplasticity and things like that, I think that's a really important thing, because I think that this practice has a lot to offer, you know, the modern world. But people oftentimes then think, well, to be a Buddhist, I have to spend hours in meditation, and I have to do it every day, and that meditation is the only way to cultivate mindfulness, or that meditation can only be done while you're sitting, which is also not true. You can stand, you can walk, you can meditate on the subway or on a plane, at your desk, you know, at work, during a break. So meditation can draw people to Buddhism, but I sometimes worry that it might drive them away or dissuade them from practicing, because they equate their ability to, you know, focus in meditation with their ability to practice at all. You know, they're like, well, if I can't sit a certain way, you know, in full lotus with my feet resting on my thighs, and, you know, I can't do that for hours, then I can't practice, right? And then they give it up and they walk away. And that's obviously not true. So, you know, to practice, obviously, you know, I would encourage you to engage with our community or any Buddhist community near to you. But practice is what we do, not only on the cushion, but during all the time that we're not meditating. So meditation is just one part of our practice, but you don't need to meditate to be a Buddhist, and not all Buddhists meditate. The next concept that I want to address is around karma. You know, and specifically karma meaning that, like, bad things happen to people who deserve it. And karma is actually the one concept that makes me want to, you know, you see the person with their glasses, the nerd, kind of push up their glasses and say, well, actually, and karma's the one, whenever I hear it, makes me want to be like, well, actually, because karma has a very solid seat in popular culture, right? And people sort of look at karma as divine justice. And I feel it's popular amongst people, you know, who maybe don't believe in God in a traditional sense, but they still believe in a sense of good being rewarded and evil being punished. And so they're like, well, there's karma, right? That's that thing that sort of that ensures that dues are paid, right? And oftentimes when we think about karma, we're thinking about things like good karma, right? Or bad karma. The belief being that if I do something good, then that goodness will be paid back to me somehow. Maybe I'll get a promotion, or I'll find money in a suitcase, right? Or I'll meet someone new, or I'll stay healthy because I did something good. I've generated good karma that's now being, paid back to me. And vice versa, if I do something bad, then I have this curse hanging over me, sort of like a sword of Damocles, right? And to that end, the most common way that I hear karma expressed is that karma is going to catch up with someone. A lot of times we talk about bad karma, not with ourselves, but with someone else, because, they deserve it. They did something bad, they're going to get theirs. And I think this is because we like to think of justice in the same way that we think of other natural laws, like physics. With gravity, what goes up must come down. And then we have these social and cultural laws around justice. Judicial system with judges and courts and prisons and juries and things like that. And so we have a sense that justice is a natural law that we can observe very objectively. But what karma actually means is action. Right? Karma is not reward or punishment. It's not fate. It's not destiny. Karma is action. Right? It is the energy generated by the things that we do. So certainly actions that we take, but also things we say and things that we think. So karma essentially means that thoughts, words, and deeds lead to results. They have outcomes, they have consequences, and those results will often make sense in the context of what we did. Right? Very directly, sometimes indirectly. But if I act in a kind way towards someone, they may be more willing to show kindness back to me. Right? That's the reaction, or the response, the result of a kind action. It can often be that. No, maybe not. Maybe they see it as I'm pandering, or I'm acting in a condescending way, and they get really upset. Right? That's still the result of my action. And I can't necessarily help how someone's going to react to that. If I say something hurtful to someone, they may pull back from me. They may end the relationship. That's a result of my action. If I think to myself, remember, karma also pertains to thoughts. If I think to myself, well, I'm no good, I'm going to fail, right? Then we may start to believe that, and then we're going to act accordingly. Right? So thoughts, words, and actions are all very closely tied together. Now, might that mean that positive actions, positive, good, well-intended actions generally have positive outcomes? Sure. But it's not a natural law like gravity, where I need to, build up good karma so that good stuff gets paid back to me. It doesn't really work like that. And of course, vice versa. And that's actually, one of the most dangerous ways that I see karma expressed, or karma expressed, is that people think, when something happens bad to someone or to a group of people, that we're like, well, that's their fate. That's divine justice being meted out. And we may start to believe that people did something to deserve something that happened to them. So a hurricane, hits a community, does a lot of damage, causes the loss of life. And we think, well, what did they do wrong? Someone gets cancer. Did they bring that on themselves? And, look, there's a lot that we can influence in our lives, but sometimes things just happen. And there's not necessarily a moral, meaning to it. Murderers can be caught, punished. They can also get away with it. Innocent people can get robbed. Robbers can win the lottery. Right? Those truths aren't meant to bum us out, or to say, well, everything is chaos. What's the point? But it should instead compel our practice. Because our goal should be to seek connection and oneness when we encounter things like that, and reduce suffering, regardless of what happens. And remain mindful of the fact that our thoughts and words and deeds have consequences. Right? We can't just act any way we want and expect nothing to come of that. So the last misconception that I wanted to talk about is the most complicated. So I'll try to not spend a ton of time on this because like, it's very easy to talk about this sort of stuff. Um, Reincarnation. Buddhists believe in reincarnation is a common misconception. I've certainly had a lot of people say to me like, will you come back as a dog, or were you this person in a previous life, and things like that. And it's I think it makes sense to kind of define some terms first, and draw a line between the concept of reincarnation and the concept of rebirth, because oftentimes we use them interchangeably, but they do mean different things. And again, it's very easy to spend a lot of time on this because it can be very philosophical, like a lot of metaphysical topics. Because essentially, when we're talking about things like rebirth and reincarnation, a lot of times we're thinking, well, what happened before we were born and what happens after we die? And boy, we could spend a lot of time, and people have over thousands of years spent a lot of time and energy on those very questions, right? But here's the thing, the Buddha actually didn't spend a ton of time talking about these things either, because he knew it was a lot of conjecture. But let's talk about reincarnation versus rebirth, just very briefly. So generally, Buddhists believe in rebirth and not reincarnation. So like I said, we may kind of use those words interchangeably, but they do mean different things. Reincarnation, essentially, and if you break the word apart, to incarnate, to come into a body, reincarnation is a belief that a soul is born into a new body. The implication being that that soul existed in another body before, and was someone previously, and will be someone again. And we see this more often in Hindu tradition, so this belief shows up more often there. And in popular culture, certainly we are familiar with reincarnation. When you have folks who claim they know who they were in a previous life, or past life regression therapy, where they're like, I have these memories of people and places and things from a past life, or folks who are able to speak languages that they've never studied. I tend to have an attitude of not knowing when it comes to those things, because I can't claim that people don't have that information, but I also don't want to claim to know why people will sometimes know those things. So I tend to have an attitude of not knowing there. So rebirth, as opposed to reincarnation, rebirth is more common in Buddhism, and is focused more on the rebirth of consciousness, which is different from a soul, right? A soul is this thing that is uniquely and eternally you, whereas consciousness is just one of the skandhas. You've heard me talk about the skandhas before, that conglomeration of stuff that's us. And Buddhism, teaches that we don't have this intrinsic and permanent self that is always there. It's just passed along to the next life. There are schools that and teachings within Buddhism that deal a lot with what happens, when we die, and what becomes of consciousness as it's reborn, and things like that. In fact, in the Yogacara school, there's this notion of the alaya vijnana, which is a storeroom consciousness. And one of the ways that I've heard the storeroom consciousness referred to is, the sea floor, essentially, where all your impressions of your experiences sort of settle in. And that leads to rebirth. That leads the notions of suffering and clinging and craving and things like that. And that leads to rebirth. That consciousness is reborn. It leads to future actions and things like that. And you can go really deep into this stuff. And I'm not going to in this talk. I want to stay kind of surface level. And to do that, I want to chat very briefly about what I think is a very useful way to think about rebirth. So I tend to think of rebirth as something that happens while we're still alive. Every moment can be a rebirth, right? And this is important Not that I expect every moment to be like a mountaintop experience, like, oh, I feel, born again and born anew. But it's important to recognize that availability of rebirth, because a lot of times we get stuck into thought patterns. We feel locked in by life. We feel locked into choices because we're like, well, I have this karma, right? Tying it all together. And we feel we can't change. And we say, I guess this is just the way I am. I guess this is just the way my life is going to be. But a big part of our practice is creative action, right? I don't mean creative in like, the way a comic book artist is creative, but to create. You are creating new actions and thought patterns and habit energies and things like that. So creative action is a process by which we are challenging the thoughts and the beliefs that manifest in unskillful actions, that create problems for us, right? That cause suffering. We challenge those and we say, well, but maybe not. Maybe that's not true. What if that's not true? Do other people feel that way? Probably, yeah. Right? And if you're familiar with our 4 questions practice, it's a big part of that, challenging those thoughts and then creating a new thought. You experiment with new actions that reduce suffering, and that changes your perspective, and that shift in perspective is a rebirth. So that maybe you used to be one way, and you used to think that life had to be one way, but now it can be a different way, and that's a rebirth, in a manner of speaking. And I get, again, going back to the notion of rebirth being, there being an implication that, like, well, what if, what happens before we're born? What happens after we die? It's very easy to dwell on that. And again, people have been doing that for a long time. Whether we go to a heaven or a hell or a new incarnation on earth, or we, are born into a different realm or a different form, right? We could spend a lot of time on that stuff. But it doesn't really do anything for us on a daily basis, apart from just being conjecture. I feel it's much more useful for our beliefs to have a context within our current experience, because that can be a part of our practice. So I hope that those brief reflections on some common misperceptions or misconceptions about Buddhism were helpful, and that they may encourage your continued practice, and maybe expand your notion of your current practice. The moment we receive true and trusting, solid and clear like a diamond, infinite light and life embrace and protect us, liberating us completely. Let us take the 4 immeasurable vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Delusions are endless. I vow to end them. The ways of compassion and wisdom are boundless. I vow to embody them. The way is unattainable. I vow to attain it. Let us take the precepts for the community of the vow. I allow my true self to manifest in all aspects of my life. I take complete responsibility for my own life and all of my actions, all of my karma. I affirm my personal being and acknowledge it as a path to awakening and freedom. I embrace all aspects of my personal being, including my shadow, so that they may be transformed. I affirm an attitude of openness to my true self, even in the midst of suffering. So I would invite you all to take some time. What we'll do next is chant, and invite you to take some time to offer incense at your home altar, at your home centering space. So we will chant the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, probably 3 times, 2 or 3 times. And once we finish that chant, and once you've had a chance to offer your incense, we'll spend some time in silent meditation and reflection, and then we'll close. Nam Apologies, I have a bit of a tickle on my throat. So, to acknowledge the fact that our practice is connected to everyone who is practicing, has practiced, or will practice, let us recite the Bodhisattva's Gatha. We dedicate this practice to the welfare of all beings throughout space and time. May it always be so. So as always, I hope that you have found these words helpful, this practice helpful. And if you would like to learn more about us and our community, and please do reach out to us at dragonflysangha.com. We also, if you're interested in seeking ordination yourself and deepening your practice, you can find information there as well under our seminary page. We also, I wanted to mention, have a new weekly meditation group starting in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, beginning, I believe, September 19th, every Monday evening at Camp Hill. And you can find some more information about that, including a map of where that group is going to be meeting at dragonflysangha.com. So, thank you as always, and I hope that you all have a wonderful week.